The lawyer cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound in the over-air-conditioned silence of the conference room. Mark shifted in his leather chair, the material groaning in protest. He glanced at his sister, Sarah, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. They were a united front of feigned grief, their black attire impeccable, their faces composed into masks of somber respectability. Across the polished mahogany table, Arthur Vance, Esquire, adjusted his spectacles. He was a man made of tweed and quiet disappointment, an old friend of their father's. He held a single, crisp sheet of paper. "As you know," Arthur began, his voice devoid of emotion, "your father, Frank Miller, passed away last week. He appointed me the executor of his final will and testament." Sarah produced a delicate sniffle, dabbing at a dry eye with a pristine tissue. "It was all so sudden," she murmured. Mark placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, a gesture of fraternal solidarity that was as hollow as a dead tree. "He was a good man," Mark said, his voice thick with a performance of sorrow. "We just wish we'd had more time." Arthur Vance's eyes, magnified by his thick lenses, held a flat, unreadable quality. He did not offer condolences. He did not acknowledge their pain. He simply looked at the paper in his hand. "Indeed," the lawyer said, "Frank was very specific in his final instructions. He updated his will 3 months ago." This caught their attention. The practiced grief momentarily flickered, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. 3 months ago, after he had supposedly lost everything, after he had disappeared. "He didn't have much left," Mark probed gently. "After the unfortunate business with his investments." "He told us he was broke," Sarah added, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of sadness and practicality. "The house was gone. The savings." "Yes," Arthur said. "He was very clear about his financial situation with me as well." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Let's proceed. I, Frank Miller, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." He read through the legal boilerplate, his voice a monotone drone. Mark's leg began to jiggle with impatience. Sarah's fingers tightened on her designer handbag. They had come here for the final act, the confirmation that there was truly nothing left to pick from the bones. It was a formality, a last bit of unpleasantness before they could return to their real lives, the lives they had purchased with their father's legacy. "As to my worldly possessions," Arthur read, his tone unchanging, "what little there may be, I have considered my children, Mark Miller and Sarah Miller Peterson." Here it was. "I have considered their actions, their choices, and the profound silence that followed." A flicker of irritation crossed Mark's face. A lecture from beyond the grave. Typical. "Therefore," the lawyer continued, "I bequeath to my son, Mark, my collection of worn-out flannel shirts, in the hope that he might one day understand what it feels like to earn the sweat on his back. I bequeath to my daughter, Sarah, my wife's old sewing box, that she might learn something about mending what is broken." The air in the room turned to ice. Sarah's mask of grief dissolved into a pale, tight-lipped fury. Mark's jaw was clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "Is this a joke?" Mark snapped. Arthur Vance ignored him. "And now, for the residue of my estate. All remaining assets, accounts, properties, and titles, both known and unknown." He paused, looking up at them over his glasses. "I leave the entirety of my estate to the Grange Hall Community Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing shelter and purpose to those who have been discarded." Silence. A thick, unbreathable silence. "What foundation?" Sarah's voice was a sharp crack in the stillness. "He was broke. He was living in a motel." "What estate?" "He had nothing," Mark echoed, his voice rising. "You know he had nothing. We try to help him." Arthur Vance slowly, deliberately, folded the will and placed it on the table. He looked past them, toward the heavy oak door of the conference room. "I believe," the lawyer said, a strange, new tone in his voice, "the Foundation's directors would like to speak with you about that." The door opened, and in walked Frank Miller. He was not the stooped, broken man they remembered. He was leaner, yes, but he stood straight. His hands, calloused and capable, were clasped behind his back. His eyes, once clouded with hurt and confusion, were clear and sharp as blue ice. Beside him, holding his arm, was their mother, Dorothy. She looked older, her face a roadmap of the hell they had put her through, but her spine was like steel. Her gaze was not one of hatred or of anger. It was one of final, devastating assessment. Like a bookkeeper who had found a fatal error in the ledger. Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. Mark looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. They were alive. They were not broke. And this was not a will reading. It was a reckoning. But to understand the profound, weaponized silence in that room, the weight of two children's greed crashing down upon them, we have to go back. Back to a house filled with love, a trust built over a lifetime, and the quiet, methodical manner in which it was all dismantled. Section. It began, as most tragedies do, with love. Section. Frank and Dorothy Miller had been married for 52 years. Theirs was a union forged not in grand passions, but in the steady, quiet accumulation of shared days. It was built of morning coffee and evening news, of scraped knees and report cards, of leaky faucets and first cars. Section. Their home, on a quiet, tree-lined street in a town that was slowly being swallowed by the suburbs, was Frank's masterpiece. He had not just bought it, he had built it. Or rather, he had taken a small, post-war bungalow and, over 5 decades, transformed it with his own 2 hands. Section. He was a carpenter, a master of his trade. He could read the soul of a piece of wood, feel its tensions and its strengths. The house was his ledger. The smooth, hand-planed banister his children had slid down. The built-in bookshelves in the living room, filled with Dorothy's novels and accounting texts. The kitchen cabinets, fitted with a precision that brought a quiet, satisfied smile to his face every time he closed a door and heard the soft, perfect click. Section. Dorothy was the house's heart and mind. Where Frank was the structure, she was the system that made it run. A bookkeeper by profession before she'd retired, she managed their lives with the same gentle precision he applied to a dovetail joint. Their finances were immaculate. Their bills were paid the day they arrived. Their savings, modest but substantial, were a testament to a lifetime of quiet discipline. Section. They had raised 2 children in that house. Section. Mark, the eldest, ambitious, charming, always looking for the next big thing, the shortcut to a success he felt he was owed. Section. Sarah, the baby, beautiful, fragile, with a talent for making her desires seem like desperate needs. Section. Frank and Dorothy had given them everything, not in material wealth, but in foundation. They paid for college educations they themselves had never had. They co-signed for first cars. They babysat grandchildren. Their door was always open. Their phone was always on. Section. Their love for their children was a vast, unquestioning thing, a bedrock truth of their existence. Section. Which is why they never saw the chisel, already placed against the stone, ready for the first sharp tap. Section. The visit was a surprise. Mark drove down from the city, and Sarah came over from the next county. It was a sunny Saturday in early May. The dogwoods were in bloom. Section. They sat in the living room, surrounded by the comfortable ghosts of their own childhoods. Frank in his worn armchair, Dorothy on the sofa, bringing out a plate of cookies she always kept on hand, just in case. Section. It's so good to see you both, Dorothy said, her smile genuine and warm. It's been a while. Section. We know, Mom, Mark said, his tone smooth as polished veneer. Things have just been crazy, but that's actually why we're here. We have an opportunity. For all of us. Section. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes wide and earnest. A really incredible one. It could set you guys up for the rest of your lives. No more worrying about a thing. Section. Frank grunted. We don't worry, Sarah. Your mother's a dragon with a ledger. We're fine. Section. But you could be better than fine, Dad, Mark insisted. You've worked hard your whole life. It's time you enjoyed the fruits of that labor. Section. He launched into a pitch. He used words like high yield, proprietary algorithm, and exclusive access. He spoke of a private wealth management fund his firm had access to. It was for select clients only. A chance to get in on the ground floor. Section. Dorothy, the bookkeeper, listened with a furrow in her brow. It sounds complicated, she said. And risky. Our savings are in CDs and some very conservative mutual funds. The returns are small, but they're safe. Section. CDs are losing you money, Mom, Mark said, a hint of condescension in his voice. You're not even keeping up with inflation. This fund, it's a game changer. We're talking 10, 12% returns. Guaranteed. Section. The word guaranteed hung in the air. Section. Frank, who trusted his hands and the things he could build, was skeptical of things he couldn't see. There's no such thing as a guaranteed 12%, Mark. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Section. Normally, yes, Sarah chimed in, her voice soft and persuasive. But this is different. This is Mark. He wouldn't bring this to you if it wasn't completely solid. It's for family. Section. That was the key, the word that unlocked the door. Family. Section. Mark explained the catch. The minimum buy-in was substantial, more than the cash they had in their savings and retirement accounts. Section. So, we were thinking, he said, looking around the living room, at the house his father had poured his life into. This house, the market is at its peak. You've got so much equity tied up in here, just sitting, doing nothing. Section. The air went still. Section. Sell the house. Section. The idea was so alien, it was almost nonsensical. It was like suggesting Frank sell his own hands. Section. Absolutely not, Frank said. The words were flat and final. Section. But Sarah had already started to cry. Soft, delicate tears that had always been her most effective tool. Section. We're just trying to help, she sobbed. Mark and I, we worry about you. This house is so big. The upkeep. Dad, you're not getting any younger. What if something happens? This is a way to have a nest egg. A real one. You could get a nice, modern condo. No stairs, no yard work. And the rest, the investment would take care of you forever. Section. Mark moved in for the final push. Look, Dad, I get it. But this isn't just about you. It's about us, too. Being able to get into this fund now, it would change everything for my family. For Sarah's. It's a legacy thing. Section. He was framing it not as them taking, but as them building on what Frank and Dorothy had started. Section. They stayed for 3 hours. They countered every objection, soothed every fear. They painted a beautiful, shimmering picture of a future free from worry, filled with passive income and leisurely days. Section. When they finally left, the foundation of the house was still solid. But the foundation of Frank and Dorothy's certainty had been fractured. Section. That night, they lay in the dark, in the quiet of the house that had held all their secrets for 50 years. Section. They're good kids, Dorothy said, though her voice lacked conviction. They're just excited. Section. He used the word guaranteed, Frank said to the ceiling. It was the thing that snagged in his practical mind. A lie you could hang your hat on. Section. Maybe we are being stubborn, Dorothy whispered. The stairs are getting harder. And the yard. Section. They were talking themselves into it. Because the alternative, the truth that was too monstrous to consider, was that their children, their own flesh and blood, would come to their home and lie. Lie to their faces to take the only thing of value they had left. Section. They chose to believe the beautiful lie. Section. It took a month. A month of phone calls from Mark, full of encouraging updates. A month of texts from Sarah, with pictures of beautiful, soulless condos. Section. They signed with a realtor Sarah recommended. A slick young woman with teeth too white. Section. The house sold in a week, for more money than Frank and Dorothy could quite comprehend. Section. The closing was a blur. A mountain of paperwork. Sign here. Initial here. Section. Mark was there, of course. To guide them through the process, he had them direct the proceeds of the sale into a new joint account he had set up for ease of transfer into the investment fund. Section. The final day, they walked through the empty rooms. The echoes were deafening. Every scuff on the floor, every nail hole in the wall, was a memory. Frank stood in the doorway of his workshop, the smell of sawdust and varnish now just a ghost in the air. He felt like he'd had an amputation. Section. Dorothy found him there. She didn't say a word. She just took his hand. A hand that had built this world. A hand that now felt empty. Section. Mark had arranged for them to stay in a long-term stay motel while they looked for a condo. Just for a couple of weeks, he'd said cheerfully. Until the first dividend payment comes in. Then you can go shopping. Section. He helped them with their bags. He hugged them both at the door of the sterile, beige room. Section. I'm so proud of you both for doing this, he said, his eyes shining with something they mistook for love. This is the start of a whole new life. Section. He promised to call the next day with confirmation that the funds were invested. Section. He didn't call. Section. The next day, Dorothy called him. It went to voicemail. Just busy, I'm sure, she told Frank. Section. She called Sarah. Voicemail. Section. A week went by. The motel room, once a temporary waypoint, began to feel like a cage. The thin walls vibrated with the lives of strangers. The air conditioning unit rattled. The beige walls seemed to be closing in. Section. Frank tried calling Mark. Straight to voicemail. He left a message. Mark, it's your father. Call me. Section. Dorothy's calls, once a dozen a day, dwindled. The hope in her voice faded with each unanswered ring. Section. She checked the joint bank account online. Section. The balance was zero. Section. It had been emptied the day after the closing. A single wire transfer to an offshore account in a country she had never heard of. Section. She stared at the screen for a long time. The numbers were stark, unforgiving. She was a bookkeeper. She understood what they meant. Section. The books were cooked. The assets were liquidated. The company was bankrupt. Section. She closed the laptop. Section. Frank was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. He hadn't moved in an hour. Section. Frank, she said, her voice quiet. Section. He didn't turn. It's gone, isn't it? It wasn't a question. Section. Yes, she said. Section. He nodded slowly. He did not rage. He did not weep. A lifetime of building, of providing, of loving, had been erased by a single digital transaction. The weight of it was too vast for anger. It was a geological force, a continental shift that had left them stranded on a barren rock. Section. They were in their 70s. Section. They had 2 suitcases, a few $1,000s in their personal checking account, and a room in a motel that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. Section. They had been rendered invisible, discarded. Section. The low point was not a single moment, but a slow, grinding descent. It was the shame that was the heaviest burden. It sat on Frank's chest, making it hard to breathe. He, Frank Miller, who had always provided, had been played for a fool by his own son. Section. He spent his days watching daytime television, the colors too bright, the laughter too loud. The world outside the motel room window felt alien. He saw men his age walking their dogs, working in their gardens, and he felt a gulf as wide as the ocean. They belonged. He did not. Section. Dorothy tried to be practical. That was her nature. She went to the police. Section. The officer at the desk, a young man with a bored expression, listened to her story with half an ear. Section. So your son convinced you to sell your house and invest the money, he said, typing slowly. And now you can't reach him. Section. He stole it, Dorothy said, her voice trembling slightly. It was everything we had. Section. The officer sighed. Ma'am, your name was on the account too, right? You authorized him. From where I'm sitting, this sounds like a family dispute. A civil matter. You need to hire a lawyer. Section. A lawyer? With what money? They were hemorrhaging cash just to keep the flimsy roof of the roadside rest motel over their heads. Section. The system had looked at them and seen not victims of a crime, but a nuisance. An inconvenience. Section. They were invisible to the law, just as they had become invisible to their children. Section. The days bled into weeks. The money in their account dwindled. The motel manager started giving them hard looks. Section. One evening, Frank was staring out the window at the parking lot. A family was loading up their minivan. The father lifted his young daughter and placed her in her car seat, and she squealed with laughter. Section. Frank felt a crack in the frozen dam of his grief. A single, hot tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. Section. Dorothy saw it. She came and stood beside him, her small, frail hand finding his. Section. We can't die here, Frank, she whispered. Section. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure she was right. Section. But Dorothy was a bookkeeper. She did not deal in despair. She dealt in assets and liabilities, in problems and solutions. Their old life was a catastrophic loss, a complete write-off. She could not fix it. Section. So she started looking for a new asset. Something, anything, that was not yet on the ledger. Section. Late at night, While Frank slept a fitful, shallow sleep, she would be on her old, slow laptop, powered by the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. She didn't know what she was looking for. A job? A room for rent? Section. She scrolled through websites for hours. Real estate sites, not for condos, but for land. Cheap land. Faraway land. Section. And then she found it. Section. It was on a county auction site, under a list of tax-foreclosed properties. It was a mistake, really. A data entry error. The picture was a grainy, black-and-white shot from 20 years ago. The description was minimal. Section. Lot 7B. 25 acres. Property includes 1 structure, former community hall. Sold as is. Section. The property was the old Grange Hall in a town called Havenwood, 2 hours away. A place that time had forgotten. The starting bid was the sum of the back taxes owed. Section. $6,428. Section. It was almost everything they had left. Section. She clicked on the property details. The structure was built in 1932. Timber frame construction. Stone foundation. A wide plank maple floor in the main hall. Section. Timber frame. Section. Stone foundation. Section. These were words Frank understood. They were a language he spoke. Section. She looked at the grainy photograph of the dilapidated building. The paint was peeling. The windows were boarded up. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. It was a ruin. An objective, undeniable ruin. Section. But Dorothy, the bookkeeper, saw something else. She saw an asset, undervalued and overlooked. Section. And she saw a lifeline. Section. The next morning, she showed him. She turned the laptop toward Frank, who was sitting in his usual spot, staring at the television without seeing it. Section. Look, she said. Section. He glanced at the screen. He saw the derelict building. He saw the price. He shook his head and looked away. Section. Dottie, no, he said, his voice raspy. That's a teardown. It's nothing. Section. It's not nothing, she insisted, her voice gaining a strength he hadn't heard in weeks. It's a timber frame, Frank. On a stone foundation. Read the description. Section. I don't need to read it. I can see it. The ridge line is shot. The roof is gone. It's a pile of rotten wood. He was talking like a carpenter, but his tone was that of a defeated man. He was cataloging the problems, not the possibilities. Section. The auction is online. It ends tomorrow, she said. We have enough. Just enough. Section. He finally turned to look at her. Really look at her. Her eyes were bright, fierce. She was the woman who had balanced his first chaotic business ledgers. The woman who had found the money for braces and summer camp. The woman who could make $1 do the work of 10. Section. To do what? He asked, his voice cracking. To go die in a ruin instead of a motel. Section. The cruelty of his own words hung in the air between them. He was lashing out, trying to hurt her so she would let go of this insane idea, so they could just stop. Section. She didn't flinch. She just pointed at the screen again. Section. It's still standing, she said. Section. It was such a simple phrase. Section. It's still standing. Section. It wasn't an argument. It was a statement of fact. A testament. After years of neglect, after storms and winters and abandonment, the core of it was still there. The bones were still good. Section. She was not just talking about the building. Section. Frank looked from the picture on the screen to his wife's determined face, and then down at his own hands. They were soft now. The calluses faded from weeks of disuse. But he could still feel the phantom weight of a hammer, the memory of a saw in his grip. Section. He was a builder, and his wife had just found him something to build. Section. A decision, a real one, is a quiet thing. It's not a thunderclap. It's a click. The sound of a locked tumbler falling into place. Section. He looked at her. I'm not driving you, he said. His voice was flat. Section. Dorothy's face fell. For a moment, she thought he was refusing. Section. You're navigating, he clarified. I'm driving. Section. The click. Section. That night, Dorothy stayed up late. She logged into the county auction site. She entered their debit card information. She placed a single bid for $6,428. Section. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, watching the countdown timer on the auction. Section. At 9 a.m. the next morning, an email arrived. Section. Congratulations. You are the winning bidder for Lot 7B. Section. They owned a ruin. Section. The drive to Havenwood was silent. They had checked out of the motel, their 2 suitcases and a box of groceries in the back of their 10-year-old sedan. The car, paid off for years, was their last significant possession besides the clothes on their backs and a digital deed to a place they had never seen. Section. Havenwood was not so much a town as a crossroads that had lost its purpose. A gas station, a post office, a shuttered diner. That was it. Section. Dorothy's directions led them down a gravel road, past fields that had gone fallow. And then they saw it. Section. The picture had not done it justice. It was worse. Section. The Grange Hall sat in a field of weeds, a great, gray beast slumped against the sky. The porch had collapsed on one side. Most of the windows were gone, not just boarded up, leaving dark, gaping mouths. A large section of the roof on the backside was missing entirely, open to the elements. Section. Frank pulled the car over and just stared. The scale of the decay was overwhelming. This wasn't a project. It was an archaeological site. Section. Dottie, he said, his voice a low groan. What have we done? Section. Dorothy didn't answer. She got out of the car. She walked toward the building, her small frame resolute against the backdrop of its immense brokenness. Frank watched her go. Then, with a sigh that seemed to pull up the roots of his soul, he followed. Section. The front doors were swollen shut, but a side door hung crookedly on a single hinge. They stepped inside. Section. The air was thick with the smell of damp, rot, and the musk of animals that had made it their home. Pigeons scattered in the high rafters, their wings beating a frantic rhythm. Section. But through the gloom, Frank saw it. Section. The main beams. Great, hand-hewn timbers of old-growth oak, dark with age. He ran his hand over one. It was pitted and scarred, but it was solid. Dry. The core of it was sound. Section. He looked at the wide plank floor. It was covered in debris and filth, but where he could see the wood, the maple was tight-grained and true. Section. He walked the length of the hall, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He went into the back, where the roof was gone. Rain had rotted the floor and the walls in that section. A total loss. But the damage was contained. The main hall, the heart of the building, had been protected by the failing, but still present, roof above it. Section. He stood there for a long time, in the quiet, dusty light. He was seeing it now not as a ruin, but as a series of problems to be solved. Section. The roof needs to be patched. First thing. Before anything else. Section. Need to clear the debris. Section. Secure the perimeter. Board up the open windows. Section. A list began to form in his mind. A work order. Section. He found Dorothy in what used to be a small office off the main hall. She was sweeping a small patch of floor with a broken piece of siding, clearing a space for their suitcases. Section. She had taken the first step. She had begun to claim the space. Section. This was the moment of true agency. Not buying the hall, not driving there, but this. The first act of creation in the midst of decay. Section. Frank went back out to the car. He opened the trunk and took out his old toolbox. It was battered and heavy, filled with the tools he had used to build his family's life. He hadn't opened it since they'd left the house. Section. He pulled out a hammer, a pry bar, and a handful of nails he kept in a small tin. Section. He walked to the first broken window. He pried off the rotten remnants of the old frame. He found some loose boards from the collapsed porch and, with a craftsman's eye, measured and cut them to size with a handsaw. Section. The sound of the saw cutting through wood was the first human sound to fill the space in years. It was a clean, purposeful sound. Section. Then came the sound of a hammer striking a nail. Section. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Section. Each blow was a declaration. Section. I am here. Section. I am a builder. Section. I am not finished. Section. By nightfall, he had sealed 3 of the windows. It was a small thing, a drop in an ocean of disrepair. But it was a start. Section. They ate canned soup, cold, sitting on an overturned bucket. They had set up 2 sleeping bags in the small office Dorothy had cleared. As darkness fell, a profound, rural quiet descended. No traffic, no rattling air conditioner, just the sound of the wind in the weeds. Section. It's cold, Frank said. Section. Yes, Dorothy agreed. But it's ours. Section. The next morning, they took stock. They had less than $200, a half tank of gas, and a building that needed everything. Section. We need supplies, Frank said. Tarps for the roof. Plywood. Nails. Lots of nails. Section. We need food, Dorothy added, ever the practical one. Section. They drove to the nearest town with a hardware store, a place called Oakley, about 20 minutes away. Section. Oakley Hardware was a relic from another time. A long, narrow store with wooden floors that creaked and the rich, layered smell of fertilizer, oil, and fresh-cut lumber. Section. Behind the counter was a man who looked as old as the store itself. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and a face carved from granite. A faded name tag on his dusty vest read Earl Hobbs. Section. Frank, feeling the acute shame of his poverty, approached the counter. Morning, he said. Section. Earl nodded. What can I get for you? Section. Frank laid out his modest list. A large tarp, a box of roofing nails, a handsaw. Section. Earl looked at the list, then at Frank. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He saw the faded calluses on Frank's hands, the carpenter's squint in his eyes. He saw the worry etched around Dorothy's mouth, and the fierce determination behind it. Section. Doing some repairs? Earl asked. Section. Something like that, Frank said, noncommittal. Section. Earl tallied up the items. The total came to more than they had. Frank's face fell. Section. Tell you what, Earl said, leaning on the counter. You're the folks who bought the old Grange Hall, aren't you? Section. News traveled fast in a place like this. Section. We are, Dorothy said. Section. Earl grunted. Thought so. Place has been an eyesore for 20 years. My grandfather helped build it. Section. He looked at Frank again, a long, appraising look. You a carpenter? Section. I was, Frank said. Section. No such thing as was, Earl corrected him. You are, or you ain't, he tapped the list. This is just a patch. You're gonna need lumber. Plywood for the sheathing. 2x6s for the rafters that are shot. You're gonna need flashing. Ice and water shield. Section. He was speaking Frank's language. Section. I know what I need, Frank said, a bit of his old pride returning. I don't have what I need to pay for it. Section. It was a bald admission of failure. It cost Frank everything to say it. Section. Earl was silent for a moment. He looked at Dorothy, who was standing straight and proud, refusing to show their desperation. He looked at the dignity in their worn clothes, in their tired faces. These weren't grifters. These were good people on the wrong side of luck. Section. Here's the deal, Earl said, making a decision. I'll set you up with an account. You get what you need. I'll deliver it. You're a carpenter. You know what good materials cost. I won't cheat you. Section. Dorothy's eyes widened. But we can't pay you right now. Section. I know, Earl said. You're not a charity case. You're a customer. A customer on a payment plan. You do the work. You make that place solid again. You pay me when you can. He paused, and a rare, thin smile touched his lips. And give me a discount when I need a new porch. Section. It wasn't charity. It was an act of professional solidarity. A tradesman recognizing another. An investment in competence. Section. He was their first ally. Section. Frank couldn't speak. He just nodded, a lump in his throat. Section. Dorothy, the bookkeeper, stepped forward. I'll keep a running ledger of everything we take, she said, her voice formal and clear. You'll get a weekly statement from me, so our books match. Every nail will be accounted for. Section. Earl Hobbs looked at this tiny, fierce woman, and he laughed. A real, booming laugh that echoed through the store. Section. I have a feeling it will be, ma'am, he said. I have a feeling it will. Section. That afternoon, a flatbed truck from Oakley Hardware rumbled down the gravel road. It was laden with lumber, plywood, and rolls of roofing material. Section. It was a mountain of debt. Section. It was a mountain of hope. Section. The work began in earnest. The arrival of the materials was a catalyst, transforming Frank from a man tinkering with scraps to a man in charge of a job site. The years of defeat and shame sloughed off him like sawdust. Section. He was up before the sun, his body aching in protest, but his mind sharp and clear. He worked with a furious, focused energy that belied his age. The first task was the roof. He couldn't save the whole building if the elements kept pouring in. Section. He was a man alone on a vast, sagging roof, a tiny figure against the sky. He tore off the old, rotted shingles, the wood beneath crumbling to mulch in his hands. He pried up the sheathing, exposing the broken rafters. Section. Dorothy became his ground crew. She hauled debris in a rusty wheelbarrow she'd found. She sorted salvaged nails. She brought him water and made sure he ate the sandwiches she made from their dwindling groceries. Section. And she kept the books. In a clean new ledger Earl had given her, she recorded every board, every box of nails. The debt grew, a stark column of red ink. But on the other side of the page, she started a new column, assets. Section. Roof, rear section, 10% complete. Section. Debris removal, 25% complete. Section. She was quantifying their progress, turning labor into value. It was the only way she knew how to fight despair. Section. The first new rafter he put in place was a moment of quiet triumph. He measured, cut, and hoisted the heavy timber into position, his muscles screaming. When it slotted perfectly into place, solid and true, he felt a satisfaction so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He was not just repairing a building. He was rebuilding himself. Section. Slowly, painstakingly, a new section of roof began to take shape. A clean, sharp patch of new plywood against the weathered gray of the old. Section. They had been there for 3 weeks when the first visitor arrived. Section. It was late afternoon. A light rain had started, and Frank was working under the newly sheathed section, grateful for the cover. A battered old car he didn't recognize pulled up. Section. A young woman got out. She couldn't have been more than 20. She was visibly pregnant, her face pale and bruised along one cheekbone. She clutched a worn backpack to her chest and looked at the half-ruined Grange Hall with a desperate hope. Section. Dorothy, who had been clearing weeds near the front, walked over to her. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Section. I saw the work being done," the young woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "I heard someone was fixing this place up." Section. "We're trying," Dorothy said. Section. "My name is Maya," she said. I need a place to stay. Just for a little while. I can work. I can cook, clean, anything." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please. I can't go back." Section. Dorothy looked at this girl, so young and so broken, and she saw a reflection of their own desperation in the motel room. The feeling of having nowhere to turn, no one to call. Section. Frank had come down from the roof. He stood a few feet away, his hammer in his hand, his face grim. Section. They had nothing. They were sleeping on the floor. They were deep in debt. They had no right to take anyone else in. Section. Dorothy looked at Frank. He looked at her. And in that shared glance, 52 years of unspoken understanding passed between them. They had lost their own children, but they had not lost their humanity. Section. The roof doesn't leak in the old office, Dorothy said to Maya, her voice soft. There's a bucket for water, and we have soup. It's not much. Section. Maya started to cry, silent tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you. Section. That night, there were 3 of them in the Grange Hall. Section. The project had changed. It was no longer just about their own survival. Section. The arrival of Maya was a turning point. She was quiet and shy at first, but she was a worker. While Frank built, she cleaned. She scrubbed 50 years of grime from the maple floors. She washed a few intact windows until they sparkled. She was nesting, creating a clean space for her unborn child. Section. Her presence gave their work a new urgency, a new meaning. Section. The small act of resilience was beginning to attract others. Section. 2 weeks later, Leo arrived. He was 19, with a shock of purple hair and a face full of piercings. His parents had kicked him out when he told them he had a boyfriend. He had been sleeping in his car until he ran out of gas money. He'd heard about the crazy old couple fixing up the Grange from a kid at the gas station. Section. He showed up offering to work for food. He was skinny but strong. Frank, hesitant at first, put him to work hauling lumber. Leo worked without complaint, his wiry strength surprising. He was quick to learn, watching Frank's every move with intense focus. Section. Then came Agnes. She was 75, a retired librarian who had lost her small house in a reverse mortgage scam that had eaten all her equity. She arrived via a church van, carrying a single suitcase and a box of books. She was frail, with a dry, ironic wit. Section. I heard you were collecting strays, she said to Dorothy by way of introduction. I am house-trained, and I alphabetize everything. Section. The Grange Hall was no longer a construction site, with 2 people living in it. It was becoming a strange, ad hoc household, a found family of the discarded. Section. A new ecosystem began to form. Section. Frank was the builder, the patriarch of this strange clan, his purpose renewed and magnified. He wasn't just building a home for himself and Dorothy now. He was building a sanctuary. Leo became his apprentice, a silent, watchful presence who anticipated which tool Frank would need next. Section. Dorothy was the administrator. She managed the ever-growing account at Earl's hardware store, but she also managed the food, the chores, the fragile piece of their communal life. Section. Maya, her belly growing, took over the kitchen, which for now was a camp stove and a collection of mismatched pots. She turned their meager supplies into nourishing meals. The smell of baking bread, made from flour donated by the church, began to fill the hall, chasing away the scent of decay. Section. Agnes, unable to do heavy labor, started a garden. In the weed-choked plot beside the hall, she tilled the soil with a rusty spade and planted seeds she'd gotten from Earl. Rows of lettuce, tomatoes, and beans began to sprout, a defiant splash of green against the gray, weathered siding. Section. They were a functional unit. The retired carpenter, the bookkeeper, the pregnant girl, the punk rock kid, the librarian. Each had been thrown away by the world. Here, they had a purpose. They were not a burden to each other. They were essential. Section. Frank finished the roof. A solid, tight, beautiful roof. The day it was done, a thunderstorm rolled in. The 5 of them stood in the middle of the great hall, listening to the rain drumming on the new shingles overhead. Not a single drop leaked through. Section. Leo let out a whoop of joy. Section. Maya laughed, a full, happy sound. Section. Agnes smiled her dry, quiet smile. Section. And Frank looked at Dorothy, and she saw in his eyes a pride and a peace she thought had been stolen from them forever. Section. They had built something from nothing, and it was strong. Section. But the world does not like things it cannot categorize. And a commune of outcasts living in a derelict hall was a puzzle it was determined to solve by taking it apart. Section. The threat arrived in a clean white county vehicle. Section. A man in a polo shirt with a county emblem on it got out, holding a clipboard. He had the bland, implacable face of bureaucracy. Section. Code enforcement, he said to Frank, who met him at the door. We've had an anonymous complaint. Section. The complaint. The weapon of a nosy neighbor or a person who simply didn't like the look of things. Section. The inspector, a Mr. Davies, walked through the property. He did not see the hard work. He did not see the nascent community. He saw violations. Section. This building is zoned for assembly, not residential, he said, making notes. There's no certified plumbing. The electrical system is non-existent. There's no proper fire egress from your sleeping quarters. Section. He was not wrong. Frank had focused on the structure, on making it weatherproof. The systems inside were jury-rigged and temporary. A portable generator for a few lights. A water tank on the back of a truck. A compost toilet out back. Section. 2 days later, the notice was nailed to the front door. Section. A condemnation order. Section. They had 30 days to bring the entire structure up to residential code or vacate the premises. If they failed, the county would demolish the building and bill them for the cost. Section. The single sheet of paper was a death sentence for their new life. Section. The despair that fell over the Grange Hall was heavier than any winter snow. They had worked so hard. They had come so far. And now the system, the same impersonal force that had dismissed them when they were robbed, had returned to finish the job. Section. Frank sat at the rough-hewn table he had built, staring at the notice. The energy, the purpose, had drained out of him. The list of violations was insurmountable. It would take tens of thousands of dollars in materials and licensed labor. Plumbers. Electricians. It was an impossible task. Section. We'll have to leave, he said, his voice flat. Section. Maya, her hand on her belly, began to cry softly. Leo stared out the window, his jaw tight. Agnes closed her eyes. Section. But Dorothy was not defeated. She was a bookkeeper. This was just another ledger, with a devastating deficit. The problem was not a lack of will, but a lack of resources. Section. It was time to call in their allies. Section. She went to Earl Hobbs. She laid the condemnation notice on his counter. Section. He read it and swore, a long, creative string of curses. Section. Davies, he grumbled. He follows the book so close he's got paper cuts on his nose. Anonymous complaint, my foot. That'll be old Henderson down the road. Hates anything that changes. Section. Can we do it, Earl? Dorothy asked. The work. Can it be done in 30 days? Section. Earl looked at her. Not by Frank alone. He's a carpenter, not a magician. You need a plumber. You need a Sparky. And you need them to work for free, which they won't. Section. It seemed hopeless. Section. But the story of the Grange Hall had been spreading through the small towns and back roads. The story of the old couple cheated by their kids, who were rebuilding a ruin with a found family of outcasts. It was a good story. A story people wanted to believe in. Section. Earl picked up his phone. Bill? Earl. Yeah, I'm good. Listen, you remember me telling you about the folks at the old Grange? Yeah. Well, they've got a problem with the county. Section. He made another call. Jim? Earl. Got a minute? It's about that Grange Hall project. Section. The community began to rally. Section. Bill, a retired plumber with a bad back and a good heart, showed up the next day. Can't do the heavy lifting, he told Frank. But I can tell you and the boy here exactly what to do. And I can sign off on it when it's done. Section. Jim, a union electrician who was on a leave of absence, arrived a day later. Heard you needed some juice, he said. He saw the work Frank had done, the clean lines, the solid construction. He saw the garden, the clean floors. He saw what they were building. Let's run some wire. Section. The town started to help in small ways. The pastor from the church dropped off a check for $500, collected from the congregation. Someone left a pile of used but perfectly good drywall at the end of their lane. The owner of the gas station told Leo to fill up their generator cans on his tab. Section. It was a flurry of activity. Frank and Leo, guided by Bill, ran PX tubing for a proper water supply. Jim supervised them as they wired the building, installing outlets and light fixtures. Maya and Agnes painted walls. Section. The Grange Hall was humming with a new kind of energy. The energy of a community fighting for its own. Section. But Dorothy knew it might not be enough. The zoning issue was a legal problem, not a construction one. For that, she needed a different kind of tool. Section. She sat down with the phone, her heart heavy. There was one more call she could make. One she had been avoiding for years. Section. Her sister's daughter. Her niece, Clara. Section. They hadn't spoken since her sister's funeral 5 years ago. A stupid family argument over the arrangements had created a rift that had never healed. But Dorothy knew one thing about Clara. She was smart, she was tough, and she was an assistant district attorney in the city. Section. Swallowing her pride, a pride that felt like a stone in her throat, Dorothy dialed the number. Section. Clara Vance, please, she said to the receptionist. Section. When her niece's voice came on the line, sharp and professional, Dorothy's own voice almost failed her. Section. Clara? It's your Aunt Dorothy. Section. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Section. Aunt Dottie. Clara's voice was filled with surprise and a hint of suspicion. Section. Dorothy took a deep breath and began to talk. She told her everything. The whole sordid, heartbreaking story. The betrayal by Mark and Sarah. The motel. The police report that went nowhere. The Grange Hall. Maya, Leo, Agnes. The condemnation notice. Section. She laid the ledger of her life bare. Section. When she finished, there was another long silence. Dorothy thought she might have hung up. Section. They left you in a motel? Clara's voice was low, seething with a cold fury. Section. Yes, Dorothy said quietly. Section. And the police said it was a civil matter. Section. Yes. Section. The idiots, Clara hissed. It's felony elder fraud. Grand larceny. Wire fraud. She was no longer a niece. She was a prosecutor, listing indictments. Section. She paused. And you built a home for other people who had been thrown away. Section. We're trying to, Dorothy said. Section. Fax me the police report number, Clara commanded. Fax me the condemnation order. Fax me the deed to the Grange. And fax me every single thing you have on the sale of the house and that joint bank account. Section. Dorothy, the bookkeeper, had it all. Every statement, every transaction, saved on her old laptop. Section. I'll have it to you in an hour, she said. Section. Good, Clara said. Her voice had softened slightly. I'll handle the zoning variance. And Aunt Dottie, I'm going to handle Mark and Sarah. Section. For the first time in months, Dorothy felt the ground beneath her feet was truly solid. Section. The work on the hall continued at a frantic pace. But the day before the inspection, another car pulled up. A sleek, expensive rental. Section. It was Sarah. Section. She got out of the car, looking thin and haggard. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled. The practiced fragility was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate edge. Section. She had clearly run out of money. Section. She saw Frank, who was installing a new front door, and her face twisted into a mask of petulant grievance. Section. Here you are, she said, her voice accusing. We've been worried sick. We thought something happened to you. Section. Frank just looked at her. He didn't say a word. He just kept working, his movements deliberate and calm. Section. Dorothy came out onto the porch. Section. Hello, Sarah, she said. Her voice was level, devoid of heat. Section. Mom. My God, look at this place. What are you doing here? You should be in a nice condo. We had a plan. Section. Your plan, Dorothy stated, involved stealing our life savings and abandoning us in a motel. Section. Sarah had the grace to flinch. It wasn't like that. The investment, it went bad. It was a shock to all of us. Mark, he's devastated. And we couldn't find you. We called and called. Section. The lies were so bald, so pathetic, they were almost insulting. Section. We have the phone records, Sarah, Dorothy said, her bookkeeper's mind dealing only in facts. You never called. Not once. Section. Sarah's face crumpled. The act was failing. Okay, fine. Things got complicated. But I'm here now. I need help. I'm broke. I need some money. Just to get back on my feet. Section. She had come not with remorse, but with an open, grasping hand. She saw her parents not as people she had wronged, but as a resource she had not yet fully depleted. Section. Frank stopped his work. He turned and looked at his daughter. He saw a stranger. Section. There's nothing for you here, he said. The words were quiet, but they had the finality of a locked door. Section. What? Sarah shrieked, her voice cracking. I'm your daughter. You can't just turn me away. Section. From inside the hall, Maya appeared in the doorway, her pregnant form framed by the new door jamb. Leo stood behind her, a protective shadow. Section. Sarah stared at them. Who are they? What is this? Section. This is our family, Dorothy said simply. And this is our home. Section. The rejection was absolute. It was not born of anger, but of a new, hard-won reality. They had built a new world, and she had no place in it. Section. Sarah stared at them, her face a vortex of disbelief and fury. She sputtered, then turned on her heel, got back in her expensive rental car, and peeled away, spraying gravel. Section. Frank watched her go. He felt a pang, not of love, but of a vestigial memory of it, like a phantom limb. Section. Then he turned back to the door he was hanging. He picked up his level. The work was not yet done. Section. The day of the final test arrived. Section. Mr. Davies, the code inspector, pulled up in his white county car, his clipboard at the ready. He was expecting to find a half-finished, failing project. He was expecting to post the final condemnation notice. Section. Frank and Dorothy met him on the new front porch. Section. Good morning, Mr. Davies, Dorothy said calmly. Section. He grunted a reply and began his inspection. Section. He started outside, checking the foundation, the new roof, the sealed windows. He made a few notes, his face unreadable. Section. Then he came inside. Section. He stopped in the doorway, and for the first time, his professional impassivity faltered. Section. The great hall was clean, bright, and warm. The maple floors shone. The walls were freshly painted. New electrical conduits ran neatly along the beams to modern light fixtures. Section. He walked through the space. He tested a light switch. The lights came on. Section. He went into the newly constructed kitchen area. He turned on the faucet. Clean water ran from it. He looked under the sink and saw the new PX lines and the properly installed P-trap. Section. He inspected the bathroom, with its new toilet and shower, all properly plumbed and vented. Section. He looked at the small, neat bedrooms that had been framed out in the back, each with a proper door and a window that met the egress code. Section. He saw the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls, the hardwired smoke detectors. Section. He saw the work of a master carpenter, a meticulous plumber, and a careful electrician. He saw a building that was not just repaired, but reborn. Section. He saw Maya setting a table for lunch. He saw Agnes coming in from the garden with a basket of fresh greens. He saw Leo sweeping the porch. Section. He walked back to the center of the hall and stood there for a long moment. He looked up at the high, timbered ceiling, at the solid beams Frank had revered. Section. He turned to Frank and Dorothy. Section. This isn't a Grange Hall anymore, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. This is a home. Section. He took out his pen, uncapped it, and on the form on his clipboard, he checked the box that said approved. Section. Then he went to the second form, the one for the zoning variance that Clara's office had pushed through. He signed it. Section. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, he said, handing them their copy. Welcome to Havenwood. Section. The verdict was in. They had won. Section. The victory was sweet, but it was only half of the equation. Justice had been served for the building. Now it was time for justice to be served for the betrayal. Section. The aftermath was orchestrated by Clara with the precision of a military campaign. Section. Armed with Dorothy's meticulous records and the power of the DA's office, she had built an ironclad case. Bank records from 3 countries. Cell phone tower data that showed Mark and Sarah were never where they claimed to be. A sworn affidavit from the realtor who sold the house, admitting Mark had pushed for the quick sale and the unusual fund transfer. Section. The justice system, which had been so dismissive of Dorothy, snapped to attention when prodded by one of its own. Section. Clara's plan for the final confrontation was audacious. It was legally unnecessary, but emotionally essential. She needed to strip away every last one of her cousin's lies, not in a courtroom, but face-to-face with the parents they had discarded. Section. She had her paralegal contact Mark and Sarah. The story was simple and brutal. Their father, Frank Miller, after a long period of homelessness and depression, had passed away. A final reading of the will was scheduled. Their presence was required. Section. She knew their greed would be the hook. The slim, desperate hope that maybe the old man had a secret insurance policy, a forgotten stock certificate, something they had missed. Section. And so they came. Section. Which brings us back to that silent, sun-drenched conference room. Section. Back to the moment the door opened and their living, breathing parents walked in. Section. The shock on Mark and Sarah's faces was absolute. It was the shock of a ghost story come to life. Section. Frank and Dorothy didn't speak. They simply took their seats at the table, their expressions calm and resolute. They were no longer victims. They were witnesses. Section. Clara stood up. Mark Miller. Sarah Miller Peterson, she said, her voice ringing with prosecutorial authority. This is not a will reading. This is a courtesy, a chance for you to see the people you defrauded before you are formally charged. Section. Charged with what? Mark blustered, trying to regain his footing. This is insane. We didn't do anything. Section. Clara smiled, a chilling, humorless smile. You did everything. You conspired to commit fraud against a vulnerable person. You committed grand larceny in the amount of $782,000. You committed wire fraud across state and international lines to conceal that crime. Shall I continue? Section. She began to lay out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The phone records, the bank statements, the transfer to the account in the Cayman Islands. Section. With each new piece of information, Mark and Sarah shrank. Their bluster evaporated, replaced by a pasty, sweaty fear. Section. Sarah started to cry, but these were not her soft, manipulative tears. They were the harsh, ugly sobs of a cornered animal. We were going to pay it back, she wailed. The investment was real, it failed. Section. There was no investment, Clara said coldly. The money went from the joint account to your personal offshore account, and from there, you spent it. On a new car, Mark. On a down payment for a house in your wife's name. On a trip to Bali, Sarah. We have the receipts. Section. Finally, Mark looked at his father. Not with remorse, but with a final, desperate plea. Dad, please, don't do this. I'm your son. Section. Frank looked at the man his son had become. A hollowed-out creature of greed and excuses. He thought of the Grange Hall. He thought of Leo and Maya and Agnes. He thought of the solid feel of a hammer in his hand. Section. He looked at his son and said nothing. Section. His silence was the most damning judgment of all. Section. 2 detectives entered the room. The trap was sprung. Section. As they were being led away in handcuffs, Sarah screamed at her parents. Are you happy now? You've destroyed your family. Section. Dorothy finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. Section. No, Sarah, she said. You did. Section. The story became a local sensation. Couple scammed by kids rebuilds lives. Creates community haven. A reporter from the city paper came out and wrote a feature piece. It was picked up by a national news wire. Section. Donations began to trickle in to the Grange Hall Community Foundation, the legal entity Clara had established for them. Not a flood, but enough. Enough to pay off Earl Hobbs in full. Enough to buy a proper furnace for the winter. Enough to build a small playground for Maya's baby. Section. The new normal settled in like a comfortable quiet. The Grange Hall, now officially renamed Havenwood House, thrived. Section. The garden Agnes had started expanded, providing most of their vegetables. Leo, having found his calling, enrolled in a vocational program for carpentry at the local community college, sponsored by the foundation. Frank was his mentor. Section. Maya gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Hope. The entire house revolved around her, a tiny, perfect symbol of their new beginning. Section. The building itself continued to grow. With the new funds, Frank and Leo built a proper dormitory wing, with small, private rooms for everyone. The Great Hall was reserved for meals, meetings, and life. Section. One day a letter arrived. It was from a state penitentiary. It was from Mark. Section. Frank and Dorothy read it together on the porch. It was not the blustering, lying Mark they had last seen. The words were simple, clumsy, but filled with a remorse that felt real. Section. I think about that motel room every day, he wrote. I used to think success was about money. Now I know it's about what you build. And I never built anything. I only took. I am sorry. I know it's not enough. But I am sorry. Section. Sarah remained silent. She had taken a plea deal that involved testifying against a former boyfriend involved in other scams, and was serving a shorter sentence in a different facility. They never heard from her. Section. Dorothy folded the letter from Mark and put it away. She did not reply. Forgiveness was a complex ledger, and she wasn't ready to balance that book just yet. Section. But that night, as Frank was locking up, he did something he hadn't done before. He screwed a new light bulb into the empty socket of the old porch light fixture he had rewired. He flipped the switch. Section. A warm, yellow light pushed back the darkness. Section. He left it on. Section. The door wasn't open. Not yet. But there was a light on, in case one day his son was ready to find his own way home. Section. Months turned into a year. Then 2. Section. The final scene is one of profound, earned peace. Section. It was a late summer evening. The air was soft and smelled of cut grass and Agnes's blooming roses. Section. Frank and Dorothy sat on the porch swing he had built, their hands intertwined. They were older now, slower. Frank's hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they were never idle for long. Dorothy needed glasses to read her ledgers, which were now filled not with debt, but with the thriving accounts of their small foundation. Section. From the porch, they watched their world. Section. They saw Leo, now a confident young man, showing a new arrival, a teenager who had aged out of the foster system, how to properly sand a piece of wood. Section. They saw Agnes, sitting in her garden, reading a story to little Hope, who was chasing butterflies. Section. They saw Maya, who now helped Dorothy manage the foundation, walking hand in hand with a kind man from town, a widower who had started helping out in the garden. Section. The sounds were of laughter, of a hammer in the distance, of the gentle creak of the porch swing. Section. On a small table next to Dorothy was a framed photograph. It was of her and Frank, taken on their honeymoon 55 years ago. Two young people, smiling at a future they could not possibly have imagined. Section. She looked from the photo of the young couple who had lost everything to the old woman she was now, who had found it all again in the most unlikely of places. Section. Frank followed her gaze. He squeezed her hand. Section. It's a good house, Dottie, he said, his voice a low rumble. Section. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the way she had for more than half a century. She looked out at the life they had built from the ashes of a betrayal. A life filled with purpose, with love, with family. A found family, more true and more solid than the one they had lost. Section. As dusk settled over the valley, the porch light he had installed 2 years prior flickered on, its automatic sensor detecting the fading light. Section. It cast a warm, steady glow over the porch, a small, defiant star against the coming night. Section. A beacon. Section. Dorothy smiled, a small, contented smile. Section. It was not the life they had planned. It was the life they had earned.